All right, you ravenous pack of carnivores. Let's get angry at each other. Let's engage in a debate on the most subjective, rose-tinted laden UFC talking point of all time and fight to the bloody end in the comments. Call me or each other big dumb bitches down below. You can call me a Pliocene epic era dumbass ape or that I spit when I talk. Let's get disagreeable. Are you amped up yet? Good, because today I'm going to be dishing out my top 10 UFC GOATs. This is another baseline set of opinions that I think is customary for any loud and obnoxious UFC commentary channel. So here it is. I'm going to be starting from my number 10 best UFC guy and working my way all the way down to the bestest best. He'll get the Jesper Trophy of Excellence. And now first, before we get started, here's a little disclaimer, okay? So this is a very person-by-person topic. Everyone's lists are going to look different. There are no right or wrong picks. This is just my list based on how I feel. And if you feel differently than I do, that's great, man. In fact, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you for expressing yourself. You're so generous and you're so kind. Please continue being kind to each other. I want nothing more than to promote a healthy discourse regardless of the topic on this channel. All right. And with that being said, here is the definitive GOAT list from the correctest guy on this platform. My picks are gospel, and if you disagree with me, you are a bad person. Number 10, Kamaru Usman. Okay, first of all, this list was surprisingly hard to put together for me. I won't spoil it just yet, but I've always had a handful of fighters in mind for right at the top. I just never really put too much thought into a precise top 10 list. There's a reason a lot of people go for top 15 these days, because it's damn hard putting one guy over the other sometimes. I had some picks that I shuffled around a good bit, and this is one of them. Now, originally, I had Anderson Silva squeak on the number 10 spot, and you can imagine why. While his run was legendary for a time, as he made numerous salty spittoon-looking motherfuckers look like weenies, it's hard to ignore that massive skid at the back half of his career. And it's also hard to ignore his level of competition not quite being up to par compared to the rest of the guys on this list. And it's especially hard to ignore the fact that he popped for steroids. Yikes. So I consider him somewhat of an honorable mention. In his place, Kamaru Usman snuck in there. It's crazy how fast we went from Kamaru Usman being on top of the world, pound for pound number one, a dominant force at 170, turning everyone into ground beef. Someone who's making a case for himself with every subsequent win as the welterweight GOAT over GSP, if he could just rack up a few more. Someone who was one win away from tying Silva's win streak record, only to be stifled by Leon Edwards in back-to-back losses, and then coming in on short notice to take on Khamzat Chimaev at 185, losing an albeit close fight, and then just radio silence since then. We have no word on the guy. However, I think he did enough in his prime and beyond it to still be considered one of the greats. All the way back from his debut in 2015 up until the second Leon Edwards fight in 2022, Usman was undefeated in the UFC. He started off as somewhat of a drab, wet blanket style for a few years, but under Trevor Whitman, he eventually developed some pretty nasty hands and started starching people left and right. Some notable wins pre-title reign were Leon Edwards the first time, Warley Alves, Sean Strickland, Damian Maia, and RDA. Then he snags the belt by bullying Tyron Woodley and goes on to have a war with a prime Colby Covington that ends with him smashing his face in and finishing him. Beats a revitalized Jorge Masvidal at his peak in the form of a pretty boring decision and then later a devastating KO. Whoops Gilbert Burns, and then handily beats Covington again. He then loses to Edwards in their rematch in a fight where he was pretty soundly dominating before the lightning fast head kick, and then he would lose their third fight a little more decisively. And like I said, he did lose to Chimaev, but honestly he did well enough that it really should have been a draw. And there are some caveats that kind of dig into his resume a bit. He wasn't always the most exciting to watch until his later years. People don't really rate Colby these days because he's inactive and only gets wins off of people on skids. But around the time they fought, the dude was a problem. So there are a few things you can nitpick, but I don't know. I still think it's a pretty damn good legacy. For his entire run in the UFC, and particularly in 2021 where he smashed Burns, smashed Masvidal, and then beat Colby again, it seriously felt like he was unstoppable. He was just a force of nature and managed to win over the fans that at one point found him kind of corny and kind of boring. He started walking the walk to go with the talk, and by the end of his championship reign, most people were pretty on board with the guy. Were he to beat Leon Edwards and then maybe get one more title defense under his belt, he would have surpassed GSP as the welterweight GOAT for sure, purely because of the stiffer competition. So that alone for me nets him a spot in the top 10. And I'll just say, and I've said it before, I miss the Usman era at 170. Number 9. Stipe Miocic. So Miocic is a bit of a sleeper. Heavyweight GOAT, hands down, no question. That weight class might suck big rhinoceros cock and rhinoceros balls now, but back when he was clawing through the rankings in the 2010s, it was a lot more dangerous. These dudes have their pack a punch, so in turn it's pretty damn hard to not only rack up a win streak, but get multiple title defenses in. And Miocic has the most. You know, when everyone's throwing leather at volatile levels, the title picture is often kind of a hot potato game. Brock Lesnar snagged the belt off Randy Couture, defends it a couple times, gets battered by Cain Velasquez. Kane loses it immediately to JDS, then gets it back, defends it a couple more times, loses to Verdum. And then in comes Stipe Miocic to stake his claim. He snags the belt off Verdum, then defends it against Overeem, JDS, and Francis Ngannou. He would then lose to Daniel Cormier, but then would get it back in an immediate rematch and defend it again in the trilogy. This dude was on fucking fire. A lot of newer UFC fans might watch his most recent retirement fight against Jon Jones and not really understand what made him so good, but just do yourself a favor and go back and watch his older fights, specifically the champ reign. He was good everywhere, to be sure, but I think my favorite thing about him was how slick his boxing was. I loved his footwork, I loved his combinations. He used to pepper these motherfuckers up. And maybe a hot take, I don't know, Jon Jones doesn't really deserve to have Miocic's name on his record, to be honest. He did not beat this Miocic. He beat an old man out of the cage for almost 4 years, coming off a horrible knockout. I genuinely think Miocic probably could have won that fight if Jones went up sooner. As for why I have him above Kamaru Usman, I just feel like the resume is a little more impressive. Mark Hunt, Andrei Arlovski, Fabricio Verdum, JDS, Francis Ngannou, and Daniel Cormier twice is just fucking nutty. And he only ever lost to Stefan Struve, JDS, which again he avenged, Daniel Cormier, he avenged that too, Francis Ngannou in their rematch, and then capped it off with Jon Jones after coming off the couch for a retirement check. He never stuck around so long that his legacy was marred by a nasty skid, and he certainly left his mark. He still holds the record for title defenses at heavyweight, and given the rate at which we're getting heavyweight title fights these days, I don't expect that will change for a long time. Number 8, Alexander Vulkanowski. This list is so goddamn hard. I almost had Volk higher than this, but I made some last minute adjustments. But I still wanted to include him in the top 10. Volk is the fucking man. I think some people can fall into a bit of a recency bias trap sometimes with being a little quick to call this champ or that champ one of the GOATs or one of the greats. I personally am very hesitant to include current champs in that discussion. I know the level of competition is much higher than it used to be. I mean, there's a reason why all the consensus GOATs came from the same era where they were just a cut above the rest and now everyone is sort of caught up. But even still, I'm hesitant to include someone like Merab or Topuria or Pereira in that conversation just yet. With that being said, Volk is in that echelon for me. First of all, he is the featherweight GOAT, no question. I know many claim Jose Aldo holds that mantle to this day, and he's definitely number 2 or number 3 maybe. His run is legendary, but at this point, Volk has done enough and then some to take that spot for me. He comes into the UFC, snags wins over Darren Elkins, Chad Mendes, and Jose Aldo, swipes the belt off of Max Holloway that was on the verge of becoming the GOAT down there himself, defends it in the rematch, which yes, I kind of think Holloway maybe should have won that one, but then he goes demon mode and starts killing his opponents. He batters the shit out of Brian Ortega to the point where his face was unrecognizable, clobbers the living daylights out of Korean Zombie to the point where he takes pity on him in the 4th round, asking him, "Are you sure you want me to keep doing this?" before finishing him, and then leaves every doubt at the door of who the better fighter is between him and Max Holloway, but absolutely styling on him in the trilogy. Then he earns a claim at a double champ fight with Islam Makhachev, the boogeyman to end all boogeymen. Goes up and gives him the toughest fight of his career. Now, he did lose that fight. I know a lot of people think he won, but no, he lost it. But he made it damn close. It's one of my favorite fights ever, just for the pure display of skill and heart from both champions. Oh yeah, and then he goes back down to defend his own belt against the incredibly dangerous Yair Rodriguez and makes pretty much light work of him. That's the fight that gave us this image. It's like he's thinking, damn, did I just do that with these here mandibles? Sheesh. It would kind of slide downhill for a bit after that, unfortunately, with 2 knockout losses to Makhachev in the rematch and Ilia Topuria right after. It took a year off, got his mind right, got his body right, came back, and broke the over 35 curse by handily beating Diego Lopez to get his belt back. Sure, it sucks he couldn't get it off Topuria, but still. This fight was grueling and dirty and rough, but he clawed his way to the top. He's one of the best champs to ever do it, not just because of his long win streak or the names on his resume, but also because he's a class act, a true champion. He defends regularly, which I'm hoping we continue to see in his second run, and he always puts on entertaining shows. Not in the sense that he brawls out like Michael Chandler style or anything. He's incredibly skilled and intelligent in there, but I just don't think I've ever seen a boring Vulkanowski fight in my life. I think he might have just squeaked the number 10 spot if I was making this list a few months ago, but given the fact he came back and reclaimed his belt, I gotta bump him up a few. Number 7, Daniel Cormier. All right, if I was good in impressions, I'd do the Joe Rogan thing, but I just embarrassed myself. Okay, but people forget, man. Daniel Cormier doesn't really come up in the conversation as much as he should in the top 10. And I know, similar to Michael Bisping, sometimes it's easy to let commentator DC kind of cloud your memory of him being a monster in the cage, but it's true. DC has quite the skull collection back home. First of all, I'm not even including a Strikeforce run when talking about this, although I suppose I could if I wanted to. But just looking at his UFC tenure alone, he takes down Frank Mir in his debut fight, then Roy Nelson, Patrick Cummins, Dan Henderson. That was enough to get him a title shot. So he faces Jon Jones, comes up short, we all know it, but hey man, it's Jon Jones, so no biggie. So he goes back to the drawing board, takes out Rumble Johnson for the vacant belt because Jon Jones is a big piece of shit outside the cage and was stripped. But anyways, defends it against Alexander Gustafsson, Anderson Silva, and then Rumble again. Then welcomes Jones to come back in for a rematch. Unfortunately, this would again not go DC's way, as while he was doing really well in the fight while it lasted, he was annihilated by a head kick. Now, it would be overturned to a no contest because Jones is a sniveling drug cheat, so he'd actually get the belt back, and then defended it one more time against Vulkanowski. He then decides to try his hand up at heavyweight and knocks the dog shit out of Stipe Miocic for the belt, making history as one of the very few to successfully achieve double champ status. And then he got one defense in by choking out Derek Lewis. And then, as mentioned previously, Stipe would knock him out in the rematch and then also win the subsequent trilogy. And this is where DC decided to hang things up. I think it's easy for some to attach an asterisk to much of this guy's career because of the shadows cast over him by Jones and Miocic, but I feel like that's a little reductionist to what Cormier was able to accomplish. Yes, he wasn't able to get the 205 belt off Jon Jones by beating him in the cage. It was Jones being stripped forcefully. Jesus, pause. However, he still racked up title wins against these absolute killers. He still cemented himself as the obvious number 2 behind Jones, and him managing to go up and get the second belt off the heavyweight GOAT and then defend it is what tips it over for me. And yes, Miocic beat him twice after that, and it might be confusing to some why he's above Stipe on the list, but I think him leaving his mark on 2 different divisions puts him a couple shots higher. There's a difference between GOATs of individual divisions and then speaking about GOATs more broadly. And on that note, number 6. Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo is one of those that's just been around for so long and at the elite level no less that it's nothing short of astonishing. He's still ranked, still making it hard for these younger fighters to make a name off him. Now again, it might be strange for me to call Volk the featherweight GOAT but then put Aldo a few spots higher, but I think Aldo's second win in his career down at bantamweight does a lot of the heavy lifting to get him to the spot. It's not like Daniel Cormier where he was able to get 2 belts in his tenure, but the fact that he has a resume at 135 that is just as impressive as the one up at 145 is pretty huge. Again, if we're ignoring the WEC for consistency, he comes into the UFC as a de facto champ at featherweight and defends it for the next 5 years with wins over Chad Mendes, Kenny Florian, Frankie Edgar, Ricardo Lamas, and Korean Zombie as a few examples. He then gets smashed in by Conor McGregor. We all know this, but the Irish superstar was basically speed running shit and immediately went up to lightweight, so Aldo was able to get his belt back in a rematch with Edgar. So already, similar to Volk, I think champs coming back from adversity to reclaim their gold is a big deal when considering them in the GOAT conversation. He then had a bit of a rough time after this, getting his ass whooped by Max Holloway twice, but then would pick up a couple wins that have aged pretty well against Jeremy Stevens and Renato Moicano, but then gets taken to task again by Volk. So Aldo goes, okay, fuck all this, I'm going down. So he goes down to bantamweight, and he was kind of fed to the wolves immediately with a prime Marlon Moraes and Piotr Jan back to back. And many might have assumed he was donezo. But he said, hold my cachaça, I ain't going nowhere just yet. He takes out Chito Vera, Pedro Munoz, and Rob Font back to back. So those are pretty damn good wins and put Aldo not too far away from a title shot. Unfortunately for him, however, he'd have to go through Merab first, and of course, he would lose. But first of all, Merab is the reigning defending champ now, and second of all, he couldn't do shit to Aldo. The fight sucked donkey asshole for sure, but Aldo is just untakedownable. He made it a complete stalemate, so honestly, this loss has aged pretty well. He'd then go away and foray into boxing for a bit, but probably realized he wasn't going to get paid quite as much money as he would have hoped. So he comes back to the UFC to take on Jonathan Martinez, who was looked at somewhat of a budding prospect at the time, and he fucking beat him. He would then take on Mario Batista and beat that guy too. Wait, shit. No, he didn't. Batista somehow made this fight worse than the Merab one and decided to smush him into the cage to get a bullshit decision win. So that sucked, but I think most people watching thought Aldo should have won, so not a huge black mark. Now, it's sad to see Aldo not really being given the legacy fights he deserves at this point, but the fact that he's able to stave off these young, hungry killers and refuses to let them use his name is just so fucking awesome, dude. And if he continues to rack up wins, he honestly might end up higher on this list. Number 5. Islam Makhachev. Now this one in tandem with the number 4 spot might piss some people off, but for now, let me just explain why I feel like Makhachev has already barreled his way towards the middle of this list, despite only really fighting at the top of the rankings for a few years. Makhachev's actually been in the UFC since 2015, but it took 7 years for him to get towards the belt. He was kind of off everyone's radar for the longest time, sort of being in the shadow of Khabib since they were in the same weight class. And you look at a lot of Makhachev's early resume and it's not all that impressive at first glance. The only real main win of note in the first 5 years of his UFC career was Arman Sarukian, but besides that, it's nothing too special. Now I'm just speculating here, but I reckon a big reason why he wasn't quite as active as he could have been and it took until 2021 for him to get some recognizable names and burst into the rankings is because no one wanted to fucking fight the guy. I don't imagine a lot of people really felt like they wanted to fight Khabib either, but he was either high up in the rankings or eventually the champ, so they basically had to. There was no name value in Makhachev around this time, he wasn't ranked, and he was a fucking animal, so no wonder no one said yes to this guy. Once they started accepting the challenge, however, Islam started rolling heads. In the span of a year, not even, from March 2021 to February of 2022, he submits Drew Dober, Thiago Moises, and Dan Hooker in a row, then pulverizes Bobby Green in the first round. Now these 4 wins are what led to his title shot against Oliveira later that year, and I'm sure many probably thought it was undeserved. From memory, a lot of people said that, Maybe that's fair given these guys weren't high up in the rankings at all, but I don't think Makhachev would have had any problem smashing through more prominent contenders if he could actually get his hands on them. Either way, he shut those naysayers up by making Oliveira look easy, and in turn halting that insane title run he was on. And I think him taking the belt off of Charles in particular kind of didn't help his case with being popular with the fans. But you know, as time has gone on, Makhachev is honestly maybe my favorite champion operating right now. I think a lot of people could agree. And while his earlier performances were kind of grapple fuck duds, these days he's rounded out his skill set to be pretty nasty everywhere. So then he has the aforementioned chess match with Vulkanowski, then knocks him Spark out in their rematch, then goes on to have an absolute war with Dustin Poirier before ultimately finishing him, and then just got off the back of smashing Renato Moicano like it was nothing. Now, again, he doesn't have the most stacked resume compared to everyone else on this list, but what places him so highly in comparison for me is the fact that he just broke the record for title defenses at lightweight, which is insane. This has consistently been one of, if not the most stacked weight classes in the sport, and it's really damn hard to stay on top for very long. Now, let's say Makhachev beats Gaethje, since it's looking like that's what they're gonna do, and then maybe he takes on Arman or Topuria next, then decides to go up to 170 for a double champ fight, where I think he'd have pretty good chances to win. At that point, people will call him the GOAT period above everyone else, if not at the least in the top 3 conversation. The fact he's already on the cusp of that with this trajectory, that makes me want to put him around the middle of the pack. Number 4, Khabib Nurmagomedov. All right, okay, so like I said, this in tandem with the last one, people are going to be annoyed that I'm placing Khabib over Makhachev. And it might be kind of hard to dispute that Makhachev may have surpassed him in lightweight GOAT status specifically, with passing him in defenses and all, and yes, Khabib retired young, retired in his prime, and there were certainly a good few fights that we wanted to see from the guy, and yes, the first half of his career was kind of padded. Yes, I get it. He's definitely not the GOAT, and cutting his career short is certainly the reason why. Had he stuck around for a few more defenses and then took on GSP up at 170 in a super fight and won, he'd be the GOAT. No question. Easy peasy. But he didn't, so I can't really place him too much higher than I have him. As for why he's so high and above Makhachev in particular, my mind goes with the fact that this dude was a fucking terror at 155 for like 5 or 6 straight years. It took him a couple fights to find his footing, but by the time we got to the Abel Trujillo fight, he started cooking these dudes. My mental image in that fight is Trujillo looking visibly confused partway the fight, like, what the fuck do I do to get this guy off me? And then Khabib proceeded to do that to literally everyone he fought for the rest of his career. Cooks RDA, cooks Michael Johnson, cooks Edson Barboza, cooks Alaquinta, gets the belt, and then he fucks up McGregor, and he fucks up Dustin Poirier, and he fucks up Justin Gaethje. He didn't even have very complex game plans in these fights. He never really changed it up. If you were fighting this guy, you knew exactly what he was going to try to do to you. Stopping it was a different story altogether. And I think one of the most impressive things on his record is the fact that he only really lost 2 rounds his entire career. Forget losing fights, he only lost 2 rounds. That being round 3 against McGregor, where the general consensus is that he took that round off to catch his breath. And round 1 against Gaethje, where while he was getting outlanded by the American, he was marching him down like a fucking Terminator. Imagine stalking someone with the power of Justin Gaethje like that, just getting in his grill and not taking the foot off the gas. So despite it feeling like there was more to see from this guy, I think his sheer dominance over the gnarliest division in the promotion and walking out on his own terms seals him a spot for me. I do think Makhachev will pass him in the next year or so, provided he wins all of his fights, but for now, Khabib's holding down the fort. Number 3, Demetrius Johnson. Now there are some people out there who call DJ their GOAT period, like the number 1. I wouldn't quite go that far, but he's always hovered in my top 5, and today I feel like the number 3 spot makes sense. Again, for the sake of consistency, I'm going to elect to ignore his WEC days as well as his foray into one championship, where he particularly cemented his legacy with some impressive wins. I'm just considering his UFC run, and in saying that, I still think it's enough to rank him pretty high. The biggest stain on Mighty Mouse's legacy is that he is one small dude, and he presided over one of the more shallow divisions at the time. Lightweight's a lot better these days, but back then it was brand spanking new, and it wasn't exactly teeming with talent or big names. And like a lot of the champs were in the early to mid 2010s, DJ was just clearly a cut above the rest. And so he held the belt for 6 years from 2012 to 2018 with no one being able to get close. They couldn't even sniff the belt. There was no chance. He was so well-rounded, so elite on the ground and in the stand-up. These dudes just couldn't do anything to him. He just lapped the division. He ran out of contenders. He cleared them out. And this caused the fan interest in his defenses to be close to 0. There was just no intrigue. It got so bad they really genuinely thought about closing this division for a time. And again, his resume doesn't look as impressive, with the only real notable wins being like Henry Cejudo, John Dodson, Joseph Benavidez, or Kyoji Horiguchi. So that might make some take his legacy a good deal less seriously. But here's the thing. I think if you took a lot more of the elite, hard-hitting 125ers of the modern era and pitted them against DJ while he was champ, I still think he'd smoke him. And my evidence for that is just look at what he was able to do in one championship well into his late 30s. He's just a straight up phenom. So yes, his resume isn't quite as snazzy, but it's not his fault his prime years took place in a bit of a dry spell for this weight class. That is the main thing that stops him from getting close to the number 1 spot. But I still think his legacy is insane. Number 2. All right, so this is where some people are going to start firing cannonballs at my skull through their screens. I was very unsure of who exactly I wanted to put in this top spot, and I kept alternating between 2 very distinguished gentlemen, and I eventually decided that Jon Bones Jones is not my GOAT, but rather number 2. I have said in previous videos that he is the GOAT. I know this, and there were points for making this list that he was at the top, but I shuffled it around a bit, and right now he falls just short for me. Jones's career is absolutely ridiculous. It's insane how long he stayed on top with the murderer's row in his bracket. Now, I already talked about his 205 reign in one of my first videos on the channel talking about Alex Pereira, so go watch that so I don't basically just repeat myself. This video is long enough, Jesus Christ. The point is, anyone with a name and a dangerous skill set at the time faced Jones. He fought everyone, and he knocked them all back for the most part. He was so crafty and creative with his strikes and the ground game that it was hard for these guys to be prepared for what was going to come their way. He was just a menace. Inside the cage, and outside the cage as well, to be fair, but that's not what we're talking about. His resume is glorious, yes. There are a few caveats in there that make me drop him from number 1 to number 2. And no, it's not because he's an asshole with numerous legal issues scarring his image. No, not talking about that. I have 3 issues that hold him back for me. First of all, dude was a drug cheat, so fuck off. Second of all, he lost to Dominic Reyes, so his undefeated record, if we're ignoring the Matt Hamill goofiness, is bogus. He's not undefeated. Thirdly, he has seriously sharded on his own legacy with all this Mickey Mouse bullshit at heavyweight. He came in and got the belt off Cyril Gane pretty easily. Cool, good win. If he just retired there, it would be no different to me than GSP coming back and taking the belt off Bisping and then dipping. That would have been fine, like whatever. The problem is, as I've harped on numerous times, he has an obvious fight that we've been needing to see for the better part of a year now, and the fucker is not doing it. He is ducking. How champ-like of you to instead take a half-retired Miocic and then try to swerve Aspinall for a Pereira super fight. Oh, how inspiring. So yeah, he's kind of tainted things for himself with his recent actions as champ, which is funny since his entire goal at this point is just to build out his legacy. Nice try, bozo. And number 1 is, of course, GSP, George St. Pierre. Yeah, it's not too hard to imagine who was going to take the top spot if it wasn't going to be Johnny Boy. It's just hard to top GSP, man. He stayed on top for a long ass time at 170, took on all comers, avenged both his losses at the hands of Matthews and Matt Serra, which while it doesn't make those losses void, it does mean he can make the claim that he beat every man he ever fought. He was good everywhere. Similar to Jones and Johnson, he was just a cut above the rest. It took a roided up Johnny Hendricks to give him the toughest fight of his career. And a lot of people complain that he should have lost that fight. But every time I watch it, I kind of feel like GSP did enough to get the win. I don't know. It was close, but he won, I think, even if his face looked worse after. We don't score fights based on how bruised one fighter's face is compared to the other. And also, Hendricks was juicing, so who fucking cares? And yeah, the double champ win over Bisping is not nearly as impressive as him taking on Silva in his prime, or maybe when Weidman was champ, or even Luke Rockhold. But it is still a feat to be able to come back after 4 years off and get another belt. Now, had he stuck around for a few years, and let's say ignored the likes of Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya and Yoel Romero, so he could then take on Anderson Silva in like 2018, I would be a lot more annoyed about it, you know? But he didn't, so no big deal. The dude's also just a stud. Never failed a drug test, always a good sport, a real professional. All the homies love GSP. Anyways, there you have it. There is the best GOAT list on the internet. You never have to look up another one. For as long as you live, this is the list. This one's correct. Have a nice day. Get out of here.